In broader economic news, some interesting comments from our friend, Jamie Dimon, who's really actually been sounding the alarm for a while about a potential recession. I think previously he said they were preparing for a hurricane. He is once again making some eyebrow-raising comments with regards to that. Let's take a listen.
It is going to happen. And I think the likely place you're going to see more of a crack and maybe a little bit more of a panic is in credit markets. And it might be ETFs, it might be a country, it might be something you don't suspect. If you make a list of all the prior crises, sitting here, we would not have predicted where they came from, though I think you can predict it this time that it probably will happen. And so if I was out there, I'd be very cautious. If you need money, go raise it.
What about stock markets? Where do you see the trough for the S&P 500?
Oh, I don't know. Look, it may have a ways to go. I mean, it really depends on that soft landing, hard landing thing. And since I don't know the answer to that, it's hard for me to answer that. But it could be another easy 20%.
So a couple interesting things there. I mean, first of all, he just says of a recession, it is going to happen, like very definitively. I mean, listen, as we've discussed, by some metrics, we're already in a recession, as much as the Biden administration wanted to workshop that a little bit and smooth that over. And he also points to, actually before he says, and that clip picks up and says, like, it is going to happen. He points to just all the signs that you're seeing in the market of, the IPOs and this happens and that happens. And, ultimately you see kind of the bottom fall out. So he also talks about, we haven't come anywhere near the trough in terms of the stock market. So always noteworthy when you see these guys who, listen, they have many, many faults, but they are paid and make a lot of money to watch and figure out what market conditions are ultimately going to be. And he's saying very definitively that we are headed for that hard landing that the Fed has been claiming to try to want to avoid.
I think there's just no doubt about it. I've been reading a lot. I read an analysis this morning also from the Financial Times just to see what people are saying in Europe. And they're like, look, the Fed is making it so that, let's put this next one up there on the screen just to underscore this, that they are on track right now for another large interest rate hike after the jobs report of last week. Basically every economy right now in the world is required to effectively also raise their rates to prevent their currencies from slumping against the dollar.
Right.
Because the dollar is king, that makes it so that the Fed actions can tip Europe into, frankly, further into recession. Here's the thing. Europe is already in a recession. They can fake it all they want, but the destruction of energy prices, of supply, and the massive shock that they're experiencing, no question right now that they're in a recession. Us, I mean, technically, probably, it's obviously wonky. I would just say things are bad and that in general, whether it's technical or not, it's a bad situation. From that point forward, pushing us further into that bad situation makes it undeniable to have a recession, and that the global conflagration on all of this is that you kind of have a spinning effect. So we raise our interest rates, and the central banks in Europe raise their interest rates, and then the dollar has all of this chaos, which affects our trade markets, our exports. On top of that, you have demand shock, basically from destruction of demand via the Federal Reserve, and you have all these massive supply shocks coming in the energy markets. It's just a recipe for disaster and for chaos, essentially, in the economy.
And we really haven't seen this global all-at-one-time tightening that's happening right now that you're referring to, where it's not just the Fed, it's central banks around the world that are all, and it is partly related to what we're doing, because we're effectively, when we're hiking rates, we're effectively exporting our inflation around the world. I mean, that's kind of a simplistic way to think about it, but it's making things difficult for European countries. It's also making things very difficult for global South countries that have dollar-denominated debt. And then, once their currency is weaker, it costs more for them to be able to service that debt, so it can contribute to those spiraling crises. And those things, of course, don't stay overseas, so that's an added risk for us. Yet there is no sign that the Fed is intending to slow down whatsoever. As you indicated, we just had this fairly solid jobs report. Employers added 263,000 workers in September. You might think that was good news. When I look at that, I'm like, oh, that's good. We still are adding, hundreds of thousands of jobs and not going backwards. But the Fed perversely looks at that as bad news because they want to crush the labor market and they want to stop new job creation and they want to lower wages. That is part of their direct goal in what they're doing here. And so when they look at those numbers, indications are that they'll make a fourth increase of 0.75 points at their November 1st and 2nd meeting. They are saying that now, after that meeting, they'll debate how far they want to go at the next meeting. But, it's incredibly dicey territory that you have such aggressive rate hikes from the Fed with the stated goal of we basically want to screw over workers, and they continue to move in this, very, very aggressive direction and, see these numbers and think that this is a reason to keep going. You're increasingly hearing voices saying like, you all might be going too far with this.
Right.
And it's interesting that those voices have also started to sneak into some mainstream coverage.
I think that from what I've read, and I read a pretty decent analysis yesterday from the Journal, the Fed just doesn't care. I think we should also not underestimate it. You and I, we have a big show, but we do not have cachet in like official economic thinking.
Correct.
And those people rule the world. The Fed is unaccountable and they are by definition independent. Per their philosophy of the economy, things are going exactly as planned. Their entire philosophy is to divorce themselves from the actual lived experiences of people's lives, specifically in order to have that grandiose, the thumb on the scale, managing up and down and away from politics, kind of the philosophy invented by Paul Volcker. So
and there's a mono ideology there too. It's not like you talk about the hawks and the doves at the Fed. They're all on board with this same policy right now. So there really is very little difference between them.
Like we can moan till the cows come home, but it's not going to do very much. And until here's the other problem, which is that by taking this out of the realm of politics, we really do make it so that Americans don't really understand anything about the Fed. And they frankly want it that way. They don't want you to have debates about monetary policy. We used to have them. I have one of my favorite posters behind me. Yeah, you can see it over my shoulder. That's from William Jennings Bryan, in the free silver movement in the 1900s. This was a real thing that farmers used to understand the direct impact on them. All of the financialization of our economy today is such that it's like, be a good boy, buy your goods, but don't ask questions.
It's a direct consequence of neoliberalism. It's the idea that we're going to let the markets decide and we're going to let the experts handle it and you don't need to worry about it. And so it's no accident that Alan Greenspan was really the one that sort of innovated in this elitist direction of the Fed. And they would talk about Fed speak, where it's like you need a freaking decoder ring and a PhD to understand what the hell this guy is trying to say. This was all very, very intentional. And over the past decade, there has been, post-financial crash, there's been some of the most radical experimentation going on at the Fed that we have ever had in our nation's history. And so it's also not an accident that during that time of completely radical experimentation, that there also is, a need to sort of tell the population, don't worry about it, we got it, nothing to see here, because they didn't want to really open themselves up to that debate and understanding of what was going on. So in some ways, we're also at a place where those chickens are coming home to roost in terms of the end of that period of truly radical Fed intervention. So anyway, it's something that we've really made a concerted effort to try to cover and decode here for everyone, because it's ultimately really not that complicated. Anyone can understand what's going on here. And there are few things that directly impact your life as much as what the Fed is deciding to do at each of these meetings. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.